The dust swirled, a choking, relentless shroud raised by a wind that carried the scent of distant rain and immediate despair. Elias Thorne, his eyes the color of a winter sky, scanned the desolate stretch of land bordering his sprawling ranch, the Bar M. His weathered face, etched with lines of solitary years and a grief that had become a quiet companion, tightened. Something was amiss. Not the usual threat of coyotes or a stray steer, but a disturbance more profound, a ripple in the harsh tapestry of the frontier that spoke of human sorrow. He urged his trusted gelding, Apollo, forward, the creak of saddle leather a familiar sound in the vast emptiness. Then he saw it, a flicker of faded calico behind a cluster of sagebrush, a shape too small, too still. He dismounted, his movements economical, born of long habit and an inherent caution. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a young woman, no more than a girl, really, huddled against the unforgiving earth as if trying to disappear into it. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, was matted with dirt and tangled with burrs. Her dress was torn, her arms and face smudged with grime and blooming with bruises that spoke of a brutal encounter. One hand clutched a pitifully small bundle tied with twine, the other was pressed to her side, as if stemming a pain that went deeper than any physical blow. She was utterly spent, a broken bird fallen from a stormy sky. When she sensed his presence, she flinched, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, wide and luminous with terror, fixed on him, the eyes of a hunted animal. He saw not malice there, nor madness, but a profound, soul-deep weariness and a fear so potent it was almost a tangible thing. Elias felt a familiar ache in his chest, a righteous anger stirring against the unseen hand that had brought her to this pass. He'd seen cruelty in his life, the casual barbarity of men who valued power over decency, but the sight of this girl, so vulnerable and alone, struck a chord of profound sorrow and immediate protectiveness. He gentled his voice, a low rumble that he hoped conveyed reassurance rather than threat. "Easy now, miss," he said, keeping his hands visible, his stance unthreatening. "I mean you no harm. You're safe here." Her breath came in ragged shudders, her gaze darting from his face to the expanse around them, as if expecting pursuers to materialize from the very dust. He saw the raw desperation in her, the instinct to flee warring with an exhaustion so complete it pinned her to the ground. He knew then that whatever horrors she was running from, they were grievous indeed. This was not a simple case of being lost, this was flight, desperate and final. He took another slow step, his heart heavy with a compassion that was as much a part of him as the land he worked. "My ranch is nearby," he continued, his voice soft. "There's food, water, a safe place to rest. Let me help you." He could see the struggle in her eyes, the ingrained distrust battling the undeniable need. Who was he? Another threat in a world that had clearly shown her little kindness. Or perhaps, just perhaps, a lifeline in a sea of despair. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her bruised cheek, and she didn't even flinch, her energy depleted. He knew he couldn't leave her here. The wilderness was unforgiving, and whatever hunted her might still be searching. His decision was made, swift and certain, rooted in a moral compass that had guided him through loss and loneliness. He would offer sanctuary, whether she could bring herself to accept it yet or not. He crouched down slowly, his gaze steady and kind. "My name is Elias Thorne. This is my land. You've nothing to fear from me." The silence stretched, broken only by the keening wind and her ragged breathing. Then, a flicker, a minuscule shift in her defensive posture. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the dawning realization that she had no other choice. The sun beat down, merciless, and he knew time was of the essence. This fragile life, teetering on the brink, needed more than just words, it needed action, kindness made tangible. He extended a hand, calloused and strong, but open and inviting. The choice, he knew, had to be hers, however limited her options felt. For a long moment, she just stared at his hand, as if it were an alien object, before her gaze lifted back to his face, searching, probing for the lie, the deceit she had likely come to expect from the world. Elias held his hand steady, his patience a deep well. He could see the internal battle raging within her, the instinct for self-preservation clashing with the learned suspicion of strangers. Finally, with a movement so slight it was almost imperceptible, her fingers twitched. It was enough. He moved slowly, deliberately, careful not to startle her. He spoke again, his voice a low murmur. "Let's get you out of this sun. It's a hard ride, but Apollo here is gentle." He gestured with his head towards his horse, who stood patiently, reins trailing. Gently, he reached for her, not to grab, but to support. She flinched, a small, involuntary recoil, but didn't pull away completely. He understood. Trust was a fragile seed, easily crushed, and hers had likely been trampled many times. He supported her arm as she tried to rise, a pained whimper escaping her lips as she put weight on her injured side. He saw fresh pain tighten her face and made a swift assessment. She couldn't ride alone, not in this state. "I'll take you up with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, yet devoid of harshness. "It'll be easier." Carefully, mindful of her injuries, he lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, a mere wisp of a thing, yet he could feel the tension in her small frame, the rigid fear that held her captive. He swung himself into the saddle, settling her in front of him, one arm securely around her waist to keep her from falling. Her head lolled against his chest, not in comfort, but in sheer exhaustion. He could feel the faint, rapid beat of her heart, like a trapped bird's. He gathered the reins and turned Apollo towards home, the Bar M, his sanctuary, and now, hopefully, hers. The journey back to the ranch house was slow, measured to the rhythm of her shallow breaths. He felt the sun beating down on his own back but was more concerned with shielding her. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the steady plod of Apollo's hooves and the occasional sigh of the wind. He didn't press her with questions, didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He knew that sometimes, the greatest kindness was simply to be present, to offer a silent strength. As they crested the last rise, the Bar M came into view, nestled in a shallow valley, a collection of sturdy buildings that spoke of hard work and perseverance. The main house, built of timber and stone, exuded a sense of permanence and peace. Smoke curled from the chimney, a welcoming plume against the vast blue sky. Martha would have the stove going. Martha. His housekeeper, his friend, the steady, compassionate heart of his home since his own wife, Sarah, had been taken by the fever years ago. Martha would know what to do. She always did. He rode directly to the porch, dismounting carefully, then lifting the girl down into his arms again. She seemed barely conscious now, her earlier terror giving way to a profound weariness. The front door opened before he even reached it, and Martha stood there, her round face, usually wreathed in smiles, now etched with concern as she took in the scene. Her silver-gray hair was neatly plaited, and her apron was, as always, immaculately clean. Her sharp, kind eyes missed nothing. "Elias. Merciful heavens, what happened?" she asked, her voice a mixture of shock and immediate maternal worry. "Found her out on the flats, Martha. Near collapsed," Elias explained tersely, stepping inside. "She's hurt, scared. Needs tending." Martha needed no further explanation. She bustled forward, her gaze softening as she looked at the girl in Elias's arms. "Poor child. Bring her in, lay her on the settee for now. I'll get some water and bandages." The interior of the house was cool and dim after the harsh glare of the sun. It smelled of beeswax and dried herbs, a comforting, domestic scent. Elias gently laid the girl on the worn leather settee in the main room. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with a fleeting look of confusion before drifting shut again. Martha was already moving with quiet efficiency, fetching a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a tin of her healing salve. There, child," she murmured, more to herself than to the unconscious girl, as she began to gently clean the grime from her face. "You're safe now." "You're safe." Elias stood back, watching Martha's capable hands at work. He felt a knot of tension ease slightly within him. He had done what he could out on the plains, now Martha would bring her own brand of healing. He noticed the small bundle the girl had clutched so tightly had fallen to the floor. He picked it up. It was pathetically light. What meager possessions did it hold? What life had she been forced to abandon? He placed it carefully on a nearby table, a silent testament to her desperate flight. He knew there would be questions, a story that would need to unfold in its own time. For now, all that mattered was her safety, her recovery. He had offered sanctuary, and as he looked at her still form, a fierce resolve hardened within him. Whatever darkness she had fled, it would not find her here. Not while he drew breath. The Bar M would be her shield. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet care. Martha, with her gentle hands and soothing voice, became the girl's primary caretaker. She bathed her, tended to her bruises which were more extensive than Elias had first realized, and coaxed sips of broth and weak tea between her lips. The girl, they still didn't know her name, remained mostly silent, her eyes often closed as if seeking refuge in unconsciousness, or when open, they held a distant, haunted look. She slept a great deal, the kind of profound, healing sleep that follows immense trauma and exhaustion. Elias made sure the ranch operations continued smoothly, but his thoughts were never far from the silent guest in his home. He'd instruct his hands to keep their voices down when near the house, to avoid any sudden noises that might startle her. He found himself treading more softly, his usual decisive movements tempered by a new consideration. He would inquire after her each morning and evening with Martha, his voice low. "Any change?" he'd ask. Martha would shake her head, or offer a small observation. "She took a little more broth today, Elias. And I think she watched me for a moment, truly watched me, or she woke from a nightmare last night. Cried out something, but I couldn't make out the words." "Poor lamb," Elias would nod, his expression thoughtful. He knew that wounds of the spirit healed far slower than those of the flesh. He made a point of being present but not intrusive. Sometimes, he would sit in the main room while she rested on the settee, reading a well-thumbed book of poetry his late wife had cherished, or simply looking out the window at the rolling pastures. He wanted her to grow accustomed to his presence, to understand that he posed no threat. He spoke to her occasionally, simple, gentle words about the weather, or the ranch, nothing that required a response. "The rain we were hoping for finally came last night," he might say. "The land will be grateful," or, "Saw a family of deer down by the creek this morning." "A buck with fine antlers," she never replied, but sometimes he thought he saw a flicker of awareness in her eyes, a brief moment where she seemed to register his words before retreating back into her silent world. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Martha found Elias on the porch, staring out at the horizon, a frown creasing his brow. "She still won't speak, Elias," Martha said softly, joining him. "And she barely eats enough to keep a bird alive." "I'm worried," Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's been through something terrible, Martha. We can't rush her. We just have to keep showing her she's safe." I know," Martha replied, her gaze troubled. "It's just that fear in her eyes. It's like it's frozen there." That evening, as Martha was helping the girl with a sip of water, the girl's gaze fixed on a small, faded sampler hanging on the wall, one Sarah had stitched years ago, with the words, "Home is where the heart is." Her lips moved, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. Martha leaned closer. "What is it, dear?" The girl's voice, when it finally came, was a mere whisper, raspy from disuse. "Lydia," she breathed. "My name is Lydia." Martha's eyes welled with tears. She gently took Lydia's hand. "Lydia. That's a beautiful name. It's a pleasure to finally know it, dear." She looked up to see Elias standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable but for a softening around his eyes. He had heard. Lydia. She had a name. It was a small thing, yet it felt momentous, a tiny crack in the wall of silence she had built around herself. A first step, perhaps, towards finding her voice, towards reclaiming herself from the shadows that had pursued her. Elias gave a slow nod, a silent acknowledgement, and then retreated, leaving the two women to this quiet breakthrough. He knew this was just the beginning. The path to healing would be long, but for the first time, a fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl within him for the girl named Lydia. Lydia's utterance of her name was like the first thaw after a long winter. It didn't bring an immediate spring, but the ice had begun to crack. Slowly, painstakingly, fragments of her story started to emerge, usually in hushed tones to Martha as she helped with small tasks Lydia herself had begun to request, as if needing to feel useful, to contribute in some small way to the household that had taken her in. She started by helping Martha shell peas or fold linen, her movements still hesitant, her eyes often darting towards the door or window at any unexpected sound. Martha, with her infinite patience, would simply offer a reassuring smile or a gentle word, never pressing, always allowing Lydia to set the pace. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, a warm breeze rustling the cottonwood leaves, Lydia spoke of her home, a small, hardscrabble farm some days' ride to the east. She spoke of a father, stern and unyielding, who had passed a year prior from a sudden illness. Her voice, still soft and threaded with sorrow, held no warmth when she mentioned him. Then, her words faltered, her hands twisting in her lap, as she began to speak of her brothers, Caleb and Josiah. A shadow passed over her face, extinguishing the faint light that had begun to return to her eyes. They are not kind men," she whispered, her gaze fixed on some distant, painful memory. "After Pa died, they said I was theirs to command. Their property." Martha's knitting needles stilled. She reached out and placed a comforting hand over Lydia's trembling ones. "Oh, my dear child," Lydia swallowed hard, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken. "They worked me like a mule, from sunup to sundown. And the littlest thing," their anger was quick, and their hands heavy. She touched a faded bruise on her arm, a silent testament to her words. Then Caleb said he'd found a good arrangement for me. An older man, a widower from town, known for his mean streak and his money. Caleb said, he said the men would pay well for a young wife. For me." Her voice cracked, shame and terror warring in her expression. "They weren't asking me, Martha. They were telling me I was to be sold." Elias, who had been mending a piece of tack nearby, ostensibly out of earshot but always attuned to Lydia's presence, felt a cold fury rise within him. The casual cruelty, the utter disregard for her humanity, it was a vile thing. He clenched his jaw, his knuckles white on the leather strap he held, but he remained silent, not wanting to interrupt, not wanting to frighten her further with his own anger. Martha's voice was a bomb, laced with an indignation she didn't try to hide. "That's no arrangement, Lydia. That's wickedness, pure and simple. No one has the right to treat another human being that way." Lydia looked up at Martha, tears glistening in her eyes. "I couldn't, Martha. I just couldn't. So, I ran. I took what little I could carry and slipped away in the night. I didn't know where I was going, just away." She described the fear of pursuit, the nights spent hiding, the gnawing hunger, the growing despair, until she had finally collapsed where Elias had found her. As she finished her story, a heavy silence settled over the porch. Lydia looked small and vulnerable, yet Elias saw an incredible strength in her, the courage it must have taken to flee, to choose the terrifying unknown over the certain horror of her brother's plans. Later that evening, after Lydia had retired to the small, safe room that was now hers, Elias spoke with Martha. "Her brothers," he said, his voice tight, "they sound like vultures." "Worse, Elias," Martha corrected, her usual gentle demeanor hardened by a fierce protectiveness. "Vultures only take what's already dead. Those men would destroy a living soul for their own gain." Elias nodded grimly. "She's safe here, Martha. I'll see to that. They won't lay a hand on her again." He meant it with every fiber of his being. The Bar-M was more than just land and buildings, it was a promise of security, a place where decency prevailed. And Lydia, who had known so little of it, was now under its protection. He found himself watching her more closely in the following days, not with suspicion but with a growing admiration for her resilience. He saw the way she tried to make herself useful, her quiet determination to contribute. She had a gentle way with the chickens, and Martha even declared that Lydia's biscuits were lighter than her own. Small smiles began to touch Lydia's lips, fleeting at first, then lingering a little longer, especially in response to Martha's warmth or a kind word from Elias. The haunted look in her eyes was slowly, ever so slowly, receding, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the world around her. She was like a tender plant, long kept in darkness, finally beginning to unfurl in the sunlight. The fragile peace that had settled over the Bar-M began to feel less like a temporary ceasefire and more like a burgeoning new season. Lydia's presence, once a source of quiet concern, was now becoming a gentle rhythm within the household. She moved with a growing confidence, her steps lighter, her gaze more direct. The terror that had clung to her like a shroud was dissipating, revealing the spirited young woman beneath. She developed a particular fondness for the ranch's small vegetable garden, a patch of earth Martha tended with care. Lydia would spend hours there, weeding, watering, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hands, once bruised and torn, now dusted with rich soil. It was as if tending to the growing things helped her own bruised spirit to mend. Elias often saw her there from his study window, a slight figure amidst the rows of green, the sun catching the golden glints in her hair. He found a quiet satisfaction in watching her find solace in the simple, honest work of the land. One morning, he was checking the horses in the corral when he saw Lydia tentatively approach the fence. One of the foals, a curious, leggy creature, trotted over to her, nuzzling her outstretched hand. A genuine smile, bright and unreserved, lit up Lydia's face. It was the first time Elias had seen her truly smile, and the sight caught him off guard, stirring something deep within him, a protective warmth that was almost paternal, yet mingled with an admiration for the strength and grace she was beginning to show. He seems to like you, Elias commented, his voice softer than he intended. Lydia started slightly, not having realized he was there. The smile faltered for a moment, then returned, a little shyly. He's beautiful, she said, her voice still quiet but clear. They all are, this land, it has a way of healing, if you let it, Elias said, more to himself than to her, but she looked at him then, a thoughtful expression in her eyes, as if she understood the deeper meaning of his words. He saw in that moment not just a survivor, but a young woman of quiet intelligence and inherent goodness. The fear was still there, a faint shadow in the depths of her eyes, but it no longer defined her. Hope was taking root, tentative but persistent, like the first wildflowers pushing through the hard-baked earth after a long drought. Martha, ever observant, remarked on the change to Elias one evening. She's coming back to herself, Elias. It's a blessing to see. She's a strong one, Elias agreed, a hint of pride in his voice. Stronger than she knows, the Bar M was becoming Lydia's home, not just a temporary refuge. She was no longer the terrified girl he had found collapsed in the dust, but a young woman with a quiet dignity and a resilient spirit. The unspoken understanding between them deepened. Elias never spoke of her brothers, nor did she, but the knowledge of their cruelty, and of Elias's unspoken vow to protect her, formed a silent bond. He was her guardian, her protector, and in some quiet, unacknowledged way, she was becoming a light in his solitary existence, a reminder of the hope and warmth he thought had been extinguished with Sarah's passing. A sense of normalcy began to settle, yet Elias remained vigilant. He knew that men like Caleb and Josiah were not easily deterred. They were driven by greed and a sense of entitlement, and they would likely view Lydia's disappearance not just as a loss of an asset, but as an affront to their authority. He often found himself scanning the horizon, a habit ingrained from years on the frontier, but now tinged with a specific watchfulness. He checked his rifle more regularly, ensured the gates were secure. The peace was precious, and he would defend it fiercely. He hoped, for Lydia's sake, that her brothers had given up, that they had consigned her to the vastness of the wilderness. But a knot of unease remained, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind that this fragile peace was merely the calm before an inevitable storm. He prayed he was wrong, but the pragmatist in him prepared for the worst, even as he cherished the burgeoning hope that Lydia was bringing back to his life and his home. The sun had barely climbed above the eastern hills, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, when the tranquility of the Bar M was shattered. Elias had been down at the stables, discussing the day's work with Jeb, his most trusted ranch hand, a man as weathered and reliable as the ancient oaks that dotted the property. A rider was spotted, then another, approaching not by the main track, but cutting across the lower pasture, a deliberate, almost insolent path. Elias's gut tightened. He didn't recognize the horses or the riders from this distance, but their purposeful, uninvited approach sent a shiver of premonition down his spine. "Keep an eye on things here, Jeb," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll see who our visitors are." He strode towards the house, his long legs covering the ground quickly. Martha was already on the porch, her hand shading her eyes, a worried frown on her face. Lydia stood just inside the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, familiar terror. She had seen them too. As the riders drew closer, their features became distinct, and Lydia let out a small, choked gasp, pressing a hand to her mouth. Elias didn't need her confirmation, he knew. The arrogance in their posture, the hard set of their jaws, the way they surveyed his property as if already calculating its worth, these were men accustomed to taking what they wanted, without regard for right or consequence. Caleb and Josiah. Lydia's brothers. Caleb, the elder, was a burly man with a florid face and small, mean eyes that seemed to miss nothing and approve of little. Josiah, leaner and wirier, had a shifty, restless energy about him, his gaze darting around with a ferret-like intensity. They reined in their horses a few yards from the porch, their mounts lathered, indicating a hard ride. They didn't dismount immediately, preferring to look down from their saddles, an implicit assertion of dominance. "Well, well," Caleb began, his voice a gravelly drawl that grated on Elias's nerves. He surveyed the well-kept house, the sturdy outbuildings, his gaze lingering on the porch where Martha stood like a protective sentinel and where Lydia was a shrinking shadow in the doorway. "Quite the spread you got here, mister." Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between the riders and the house. His stance was relaxed, yet there was an undeniable strength in his stillness, a quiet authority that Caleb's bluster couldn't immediately penetrate. "This is private property," Elias stated, his voice even. State your business, Josiah snorted, a small, unpleasant sound. Our business is with our sister, Lydia. We know she's here. Saw her scurry inside like a frightened rabbit, his eyes, cold and assessing, flicked towards the doorway. Lydia flinched as if struck. Elias felt a surge of anger, but he kept his expression neutral. Lydia is under my protection, he said, his words measured but unequivocal. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Your protection? She ain't yours to protect. She's ours. Our blood. Our responsibility. She's a grown woman, Elias countered, capable of making her own decisions. And from what I understand, your idea of responsibility is something she had good reason to flee. A dark flush crept up Caleb's neck. That's family business, mister. None of yours. We're here to take her home, where she belongs, home. The word was a soft echo from the doorway. Lydia had stepped forward, her terror still visible, but now overlaid with a spark of defiance, a courage born of the safety she had found and the injustice she was no longer willing to passively endure. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. That place was never a home. It was a prison. And you were my jailers. Caleb's face contorted with fury at her open defiance. You ungrateful whelp. After all we done for you. Done for me. Lydia's voice gained strength. You mean after you worked me to the bone and then tried to sell me like a head of cattle? That's what you did for me. Josiah spurred his horse a step closer, his hand dropping to the butt of the pistol holstered at his hip. You best watch your mouth, girl. And you, mister, best step aside. We ain't leaving without her. The air crackled with tension. The morning sun seemed to lose its warmth. This was the confrontation Elias had dreaded but prepared for. The storm had arrived, and it was clear her brothers were not here for a polite discussion. They were here to claim what they believed was theirs, and they looked ready to use force if necessary. Martha, who had remained silent but resolute, took a step to stand slightly in front of Lydia, her small frame radiating an unexpected fierceness. The lines were drawn. Elias met Caleb's furious gaze, his own steady and unwavering. The scent of dust and horse sweat mingled with the charged atmosphere, heavy with unspoken threats. Lydia is not going anywhere against her will, Elias stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch that carried more weight than any shout. She has found sanctuary here, and I will not see that violated. Caleb scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Sanctuary? You fill her head with fancy words, old man. She's a runaway, and by law, she belongs with her kin. Her father, rest his soul, would expect us to look after her, to see she's provided for. Lydia's voice, though still laced with fear, now held a bitter incredulity. You call being bartered off to a cruel stranger provided for? You call beatings and starvation looked after? Her words, raw and heartfelt, hung in the air, a damning indictment of her brother's character. Josiah, ever the more volatile of the two, shifted impatiently in his saddle. Enough of this talk. We came for what's ours. You gonna give her up peaceful like, or do we have to persuade you? His hand tightened on his pistol, a clear, unambiguous threat. Elias didn't flinch. He had faced down armed men before, men driven by greed or desperation. These two, for all their bluster, reeked of a cowardly sort of malice. There will be no persuading, Elias said calmly. Only a choice. Lydia's choice. And as for you laying a hand on anyone on this ranch, I'd advise strongly against it. He hadn't moved, yet there was an aura about him, a readiness that gave even Caleb pause. Martha, her chin held high, spoke then, her voice surprisingly firm. This child has suffered enough at your hands. You'll not torment her further. This is a decent home, something you clearly know nothing about. Caleb's eyes, like chips of cold flint, flicked from Martha to Lydia, then settled on Elias. He seemed to be weighing his options, the determination on Elias's face against his own perceived right. She's flighty, simple-minded, Caleb sneered, trying a different tack. She don't know what's good for her. We're her family. We know best. She knows kindness when she sees it, Elias retorted sharply. And she knows cruelty. She's made her choice based on that. A choice any sensible person would make. He then turned his head slightly, his gaze softening as he addressed Lydia, though his voice remained audible to all. Lydia, what is your wish? No one will force you to do anything you don't want to do. You are free to choose. All eyes turned to Lydia. She stood straighter now, her earlier terror giving way to a resolute courage that seemed to draw strength from Elias's unwavering support and Martha's steadfast presence. She looked directly at her brothers, her gaze holding none of the fear they were accustomed to seeing in her. I choose to stay, she declared, her voice clear and strong, resonating across the quiet yard. I choose to stay here, with Mr. Thorne and Martha. This is my home now. Caleb's face purpled with rage. You ungrateful. You choose strangers over your own blood. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, Martha interjected quietly but firmly, her eyes meeting Caleb's. She has found a truer family here. Enough. Caleb roared, his patience snapping. He made a sudden move, as if to dismount and physically drag Lydia away. Josiah, let's get her. Josiah, emboldened by his brother's command, started to swing his leg over his horse. But Elias moved with surprising speed for a man his age. In a blur of motion, he stepped forward, and suddenly a rifle was in his hands, not raised in a direct threat, but held with a casual readiness that spoke volumes. It had been leaning just inside the doorway, unseen by the brothers but easily accessible to Elias. I believe I advised against that, Elias said, his voice like ice. This is as far as you go. Turn your horses around and leave. And don't ever come back. The sight of the rifle, and the cold, deadly earnestness in Elias's eyes, finally seemed to penetrate the brothers' arrogance. Josiah froze mid-movement, his eyes wide. Caleb, though still seething, hesitated. He looked from the rifle to Elias's implacable face, then to Lydia's defiant stance, and finally to Martha's unwavering gaze. He saw no fear, no weakness to exploit, only a united front of courage and conviction. The bluster began to drain from him, replaced by a sullen resentment. Caleb's florid face was a mask of thwarted rage. He stared at the rifle in Elias's hands, then at Elias's unyielding expression. The confidence that had fueled his arrogance moments before began to crumble, exposing the cowardice beneath. He had expected an easy victory, a timid girl and perhaps a reluctant old man. He had not anticipated this quiet, steely resolve, this unexpected fortress of decency. You can't keep her here forever, Caleb blustered, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. She's our sister. She is a guest in my home, and she has chosen to stay, Elias repeated, his tone unwavering. That is her right. A right you seem determined to ignore. But you will not ignore it here, not on my land. He took a small, almost imperceptible step forward, the rifle held loosely but purposefully. The choice before you now is simple. Leave peacefully, or face the consequences of trespassing and threatening the inhabitants of this ranch. I assure you, those consequences will be severe. Josiah, always the more skittish of the two, looked nervously at his brother, then back at Elias. The fight had clearly gone out of him. He had no stomach for a confrontation where the odds were not overwhelmingly in his favor. Caleb, Josiah muttered, his voice barely audible, maybe we should go. She ain't worth getting shot over. Caleb shot his brother a venomous glare, but the fight in his own eyes was dimming. He knew when he was beaten, even if his pride wouldn't let him admit it gracefully. He looked at Lydia one last time, his expression a mixture of fury and a dawning, bitter realization that he had lost control over her. You'll regret this, girl, he spat, his voice laced with venom. You'll come crawling back when these fancy folks tire of you. Lydia met his gaze, her fear now entirely replaced by a quiet strength. I will never crawl back to you, she said, her voice steady. I have found kindness here, something you wouldn't understand. Elias gestured with the rifle, a small, decisive movement towards the track leading away from the ranch. Time to leave. With a final, hateful glare at Elias and Lydia, Caleb wrenched his horse's head around. Josiah, looking relieved, quickly followed suit. They rode away, not with the arrogant swagger of their arrival, but with the slumped shoulders of defeated bullies. They didn't look back. Elias watched them until they were distant figures, shrinking against the vastness of the plains, their dark shapes eventually disappearing over the rise. Only then did he lower the rifle, the tension slowly ebbing from his shoulders. He turned to see Lydia, her face pale but resolute, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, tears not of fear this time, but of relief, of a profound, overwhelming release. Martha was beside her instantly, her arm around Lydia's shoulders, murmuring words of comfort. It's over, child. It's truly over. They won't be back. Lydia leaned into Martha's embrace, a sob escaping her. Elias approached them, his expression softening. He placed a hand gently on Lydia's other shoulder. "You were brave, Lydia," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "You stood up to them. You claimed your freedom." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears and a dawning gratitude that was almost too profound for words. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Elias simply nodded, his own heart full. The confrontation had been ugly, a stark reminder of the darkness that existed in the world. But it had also been a crucible, forging a new reality for Lydia, and cementing the bonds of their unconventional family. The threat had been met, face down, not with matching brutality, but with courage, conviction, and an unshakable belief in the right to dignity and choice. The immediate aftermath was one of exhausted relief. The adrenaline faded, leaving a quiet hum in the air. The sun climbed higher, now bathing the Bar M in its full, warm light, as if nature itself approved of the outcome. The ranch felt safe again, truly safe, the shadows of the past finally banished by the unwavering light of courage and compassion. Lydia, supported by Martha and Elias, was more than just a rescued girl. She was a survivor who had found her voice and her strength on the porch of a ranch that had become, against all odds, her true home. Life on the Bar M slowly returned to its familiar rhythms, but with a subtle, profound shift. The dark cloud of Lydia's past, embodied by her brothers, had been confronted and dispersed. In its place, a clearer sky dawned, promising a future built not on fear, but on the quiet strength of their newly forged family. Lydia, freed from the immediate terror of her brother's return, began to truly flourish. The last vestiges of the hunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by a serene confidence. She moved about the ranch with a newfound grace, her laughter, once a rare and hesitant sound, now heard more frequently, mingling with Martha's cheerful humming or Elias's quieter tones. She threw herself into the life of the ranch with a gentle enthusiasm. Her garden thrived under her dedicated care, producing a bounty that graced their table and even allowed for some to be shared with Jeb and the other hands. She learned to mend clothes with surprising skill, her stitches neat and even, and Martha declared that Lydia's bread was the best she'd tasted in years. She was no longer a guest, nor a dependent, but an integral part of their home, contributing her warmth, her quiet intelligence, and her resilient spirit to the fabric of their daily lives. Elias found his own life immeasurably enriched. The deep well of loneliness that had been his companion since Sarah's death began to recede, filled by Lydia's quiet presence and Martha's steadfast friendship. He found himself sharing stories of his past, of Sarah, of his dreams for the Bar M, things he hadn't spoken of in years. Lydia was a patient and empathetic listener, her presence a quiet comfort. The bond between Elias and Lydia deepened, evolving into a relationship of profound mutual respect and affection. It was more than paternal, yet it held no immediate pressure of romance. It was the quiet understanding between two souls who had found solace and strength in each other. He saw in her not just the young woman he had rescued, but a person of remarkable character, whose inherent goodness had survived unspeakable hardship. Martha, observing them, often smiled to herself. She had always hoped Elias would find companionship again, a way to ease the sorrow that had shadowed him for so long. In Lydia, she saw not only a young woman deserving of happiness but also a source of new joy for Elias, a completion to their small, unconventional household. "She's brought light back into this house, Elias," Martha said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky. Elias nodded, his gaze resting on Lydia, who was in the yard, gently coaxing a stray kitten with a saucer of milk. "She has, Martha. She truly has." The themes of healing and chosen family were no longer abstract concepts but lived realities on the Bar M. Lydia, who had been treated as less than human by her own blood, found her inherent worth affirmed every day by the kindness and respect she received from Elias and Martha. She learned that family was not solely defined by birth, but by love, loyalty, and mutual care. The ranch itself seemed to breathe easier, its fences secure, its fields productive, its heart, the main house, filled with a quiet contentment. The memory of Caleb and Josiah's visit remained, a reminder of the battle won, but it no longer cast a shadow. Instead, it served as a testament to their collective strength. There were still moments, of course, when a sudden noise or a fleeting shadow might cause Lydia to start, a flicker of old fear passing through her eyes. But these moments became fewer and farther between, quickly dispelled by the comforting reality of her present safety. Elias would see it, and his quiet reassurance, a gentle word or a steadying glance, would be enough to banish the ghosts. The Bar-M became her true sanctuary, a place where her spirit, once so battered, could finally heal and grow strong, nurtured by the unwavering kindness of the men who had rescued her and the warm-hearted woman who had welcomed her as her own. A new dawn had indeed broken, bright with the promise of peace and the quiet joy of a family found. Years melted into decades, each season etching deeper lines of character on Elias's face and adding a gentle wisdom to Lydia's eyes. The Bar-M prospered, not just in cattle and crops, but in the richness of the life cultivated within its fences. The fierce protectiveness Elias had felt for Lydia on that first day had, over time, blossomed into a deep and abiding love, a love that was returned in full measure. Theirs was a courtship born not of youthful passion, but of shared experiences, mutual respect, and a profound understanding of each other's souls. They married quietly one spring morning, under the ancient cottonwood by the creek, with Martha and Jeb as their witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, yet filled with an immeasurable joy, a testament to the enduring power of second chances. Lydia, no longer the frightened girl but a radiant woman, became the heart of the Bar-M in a way that complemented Elias's steadfast strength. Their home, already filled with warmth, now echoed with a new kind of happiness. Soon, the laughter of children joined the chorus. First came Samuel, with Elias's thoughtful eyes and Lydia's gentle smile, and then little Sarah, named in loving memory, a vibrant child with her mother's golden hair and an indomitable spirit. Elias, who had thought his chance at fatherhood was long past, embraced it with a tenderness that surprised even himself. He taught Samuel to ride, to understand the land, to treat every living creature with respect. Lydia instilled in both children her own quiet strength, her compassion, and her love for learning. Martha, aging gracefully, became a beloved grandmother figure, her lap always ready for a story, her hands always busy knitting small sweaters or baking special treats. She watched the family she had helped nurture grow and flourish, her heart overflowing. The legacy of their chosen family extended beyond the boundaries of the Bar-M. Elias and Lydia became respected figures in the burgeoning community, known for their integrity, their generosity, and their unwavering commitment to justice. They helped establish the town's first schoolhouse, Lydia herself teaching for a time, sharing her love of books and knowledge. They offered aid to neighbors in need, their ranch a beacon of stability and kindness in a sometimes harsh and unforgiving land. The story of Lydia's rescue and her brother's thwarted cruelty became a quiet legend, a reminder of the triumph of good over evil, of compassion over greed. As for Caleb and Josiah, word had trickled back years later that their hardscrabble farm had failed, their cruelty and mismanagement leading them to ruin. They had drifted further west, becoming footnotes in the vast, uncaring expanse, their lives a testament to the emptiness of a path chosen without decency or kindness. Their fate served only to highlight the brightness of the life Lydia had built. Elias lived to see his grandchildren, their small hands clutching his weathered ones, their laughter a sweet melody that filled his final years with peace. He passed quietly in his sleep, an old man full of years and love, Lydia by his side, his legacy secure not just in the land he had tamed, but in the family he had nurtured and the values he had upheld. Lydia, with Samuel and young Sarah by her side, continued to steward the Bar-M, her spirit as resilient and her heart as generous as ever. The ranch remained a sanctuary, a place where kindness was the currency and love the foundation. The single act of compassion Elias Thorne had shown to a desperate girl in the dust had rippled outwards, creating generations of light, a testament to the enduring truth that out of the deepest darkness, the most profound and lasting hope can be born. The wind still whispered through the cottonwoods by the creek, but now it carried not tales of despair, but echoes of laughter, love, and a life richly, bravely, and beautifully lived. The legacy of the farmer's daughter and the righteous rancher was written not in stone, but in the thriving land and the loving hearts of all who called the Bar-M home.